I just wanted to, of course, thank you both for coming to Chicago and agreeing to talk to us before this, as well as a kind of crazy afternoon and evening on the day you actually arrived, which is even nicer. So, and I'm especially excited to talk about, obviously, your father and grandfather, Karel Zeman. And so I thought we should probably start kind of with the basics. And so for anyone who might not know his work, I guess, who is Karel Zeman and what should we know about him, I guess?
Well, Karel Zeman is first my grandfather, of course, and a wonderful person and a man whom I love very much. And he's also, to me, a world filmmaker who made fantastic films that I still admire today and many people admire. And he really, I think to me, he gave everything of himself, his love of adventure, fantasy, children, into all his work. And that I think is very beautiful and generous, and it reflects in his films.
Okay. For me, is my father, yes. my great friend also, like Linda said, he was a really special person also. I learned a lot from him.
And he's also your co-worker.
Yes, and always inspiration whole life. And when I was working with him, it was the best school in my life, especially that I was also a designer. Therefore, everything what he was doing was very good for my life later. And I was fortunate that I worked with him some of his also feature film with live action actor, and I learned how to build scenes and everything. Therefore, I still admire him, and I remember from that time that I should listen more his experience. Therefore, I admire him as a filmmaker, and still, for me, it's everything what we see again, it's like new. And I was working on this digital version, and also it was unbelievable how his film still, after this 50 years, it's a very modern movie, especially with design and also with idea. It's very temporary.
Well, about those restorations, I'm curious, kind of how did you, kind of what was the reason you decided to start that process? How did you, I know you started with, I guess in English we call it Invention for Destruction, or The Fabulous World of Jules Verne, and you were here in Chicago last year showing that one, and this weekend you'll be showing Baron Praschil, or Baron von Munchausen. So I guess, how did you decide on those two? I know those are two of his well-known films. Was that part of the reason, or kind of, how did you get started? What were the challenges you had in kind of getting those restorations done and out? And can we look forward to new and other restorations in the future?
Well, the first challenge, of course, is money. Like with everything else, in that you need to. It's not a simple process.
Right.
It's very onerous. It takes a lot of hours, and it requires a good team, which we found in Prague, UPP, the post-production house.
Okay.
And also we needed to get financing, and that's what really started that journey, was the establishment of the Karel Zeman Museum in Prague. So the establishment and the success of the museum, that's still continuing today, which we're really, really proud of and happy with, sort of started that search, that process.
Mm-hmm.
It also was a catalyst for sort of the documentary film that we're
Mm-hmm.
going to see here today, and also for the restoration of the films, because these films, many agreed, really need to be preserved. And
Mm-hmm.
so the fear is always, how do we preserve this in the best way? And because they're still modern and say a lot to today's audiences, to bring it to the new generation.
Okay.
And then the question was, which films? And like you said, Invention for Destruction, Baron Munchausen, and Voyage to the Prehistoric Times are three of, I think, my grandfather's most famous and significant films.
Mm-hmm.
And we would really like to restore all of the films.
Of
And
course.
that's our eventual goal, our plan. But we had to start with something. And that was good ones. Those are the good ones to start with,
Absolutely.
basically.
Yes. Well, I guess, I mean, you were talking about how still modern his films feel, or contemporary, and that's certainly anything you read or hear about his work. Everybody talks about his unique visual style, which is perhaps most noticeable in these first two restorations about Jules Verne and Baron Munchausen. So I'm curious if you could just, you know, I have no knowledge of filmmaking, but I know, having seen the documentary you guys have done, that he was really innovative in terms of how he created these effects and these, particularly the way he merged animation and puppetry and live action in a way that I think anticipated things that we wouldn't see for decades afterwards more commonly. So I don't know if you could talk about how he came to that, and who he worked with to do that, and some of those, at least some of those techniques that maybe his most common, that would be useful for us to know.
Oh, yes, so
Like you can, in this way, it's very good that you can also, we can sort of link it to the first question you had, because in the digital restoration, because of the innovative techniques he used,
Yes,
that
yeah.
posed a certain challenge. That's sort of the
Yeah.
part two. So you can,
yeah, I can just go back. I don't know if I should start. What you ask me, because I understand you want to know how he get this aesthetic result to
Right.
combine puppet with live actor.
Right.
And it was really unique in my father technique, because he was base designer. He loved painting. He was very aesthetic. Therefore, he was working as before as a designer. Therefore, every inspiration for his film was based on some style or what was special in design. And he always said, you know, the amazing is that you can get in movement your design,
Right.
you know. And it was the base that he started with puppet in the beginning, and slowly during this lifetime and all these films, he started to combine the live actor with puppet. But base was always as design.
Okay.
Therefore, he wanted fit with the live actor, also with puppet in this style. Therefore, he adapt even actor to his imagination,
Right.
his design. I think it was based what was unique in his approach to combine this technique, even cell animation, cut out all this technique. He was
Right.
able to get together very well, you know. And the problem in digital version, for us was to make film exactly how he made this film these 50 years ago, because even we had this computer, all these technical invention, we had really trouble to get the softness and everything what was unique in his style. But especially for Baron Munchausen, we really succeed. Even I remember the head of UPP, like Linda said, he called me and he said, Urmila, come to my office. He had the editing table and he said, look, we got negative, but it's black and white, and Baron Munchausen is color film. How we get the color there? And it was really puzzle. And we realized that he was so genius that he make almost whole film, the combination black and white, the live actor and puppet in black and white negative. And he achieved this way modern style of how to color the film.
Wow.
Because he used color like a symbol, you know, not like was used to have realistic film in color.
Right.
But there was allowed him to make this stylization that he added later the color double another exposure, double exposure,
right,
or optically in lab. Therefore, this was really challenge for us to make this digital version.
And he always used, he often used different system. So
Okay.
it wasn't like he did the whole film
Yeah.
one way. He basically did whatever was appropriate, and he had this genius sense for that, that he knew what was appropriate for that particular scene. So
Okay.
the color, for example, was added optically, or it was painted on, or it was done differently. And then he managed to link it all together. So it was not, you couldn't see that it was done in different ways, because then it was sort of linked together like it was done the same way. This is why it was a big shock when we got the negatives, and then in the negative parts were in black and white. But luckily, because my mother worked with my grandfather, and because my grandfather was very good at keeping notes and
Yeah.
writing things down, and
Study.
my mother managed to figure out how the color was applied, and then we were able to really include that in the digital
It's-
process.
Especially last stage of digital process, when we make the correction in color, it was really necessary to have very good copy, like an
Right.
example for right color, and with a very good friend James Makowski. He was
James Makowski,
he
yeah,
was
he was
archivist
great.
from Francis Coppola, and he was doing this work.
He helped us with the whole digitization.
Yes,
So that
and
was great.
and we were with a magnifying glass like that, each frame, which
Studying how the color-
check, and they in a projection room we watched the already digital version, but the color were not sometimes right. Therefore, we always said stop and watch, and you have to boost this red is different. You know, it was like that because in digital version film, which is made in a real environment, it's much easy, or right away result very good after digital version transfer.
right.
But in my father case, it was difficult because it was really painting this movie, and we have to make same version. Therefore, it was more work, but everybody loves it. I must say, the technician, everybody who work on this version, they realize how like for education is good, this kind of film we go through. And he was making this special effect long time ago, and we still were not sure how he made it.
Which is
nice.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm also interested in you were talking about how he was always interested in design and aesthetics and painting, and so I guess I'm interested in terms of the inspiration, at least of the two films you've restored. They have a kind of literary source material, but they also have illustrative source material, and so they have. I guess I'm curious as to was the draw to these projects more the illustrations that caught his attention to try and bring Jules Verne in based on these engravings, these original kind of engravings, and the same for Baron Munchausen, which has Gustave Doré, is the kind of one of the first illustrators of these works. So I guess which came first, the interest in the story or the interest in these kind of crazy illustrations, or did they come at the same time? Or
Well, the way we can start is that my grandfather loved Jules Verne.
Okay.
So as a young man, he loved to read about the adventure and imagine the fantasy, and that's the kind of literature I think he liked to read himself personally. But then
it's true that when he was really director and make films, his first input was really design.
Okay.
And he was he was thinking to make in design which nobody else made in movement. Therefore, he chose very difficult one like Gustave Doré or from this engraving from Jules Verne stories, which were beautiful, and they were part of this literary version, and he wanna transfer in the movie. And also, it's through these stories offer him to make imagination free, especially Baron Munchausen or Jules Verne, like you said before we were talking about it. He loved Jules Verne because he was able to combine technology with poetry.
Well, what we were talking about is the uniqueness of Jules Verne, and the attraction my grandfather had for Jules Verne was also because it's true that he was able to sort of foresee the technology, the future, and he was able to talk about machines and things that came long after him. But the beauty, the thing that my grandfather loved, that in that technological outlook, he also was able to maintain in there the romance, the romanticism, and the poetry.
Okay.
And that's kind of what I think was my grandfather's real goal, to keep that in telling the story. So, and he also, I think, imagined, he was very good, that's what we also were talking about, he was extremely efficient, and he always was able to choose appropriate design or an appropriate method to portray a certain story. So for him, the illustrations that were with the Jules Verne stories, the engravings, seemed really fitting. That's how he imagined that world, that romantic kind of world, and that's why he wanted to bring it to life. And Baron Munchausen, it was something else, or his other films like The Stolen Airship. He was very much inspired by the Seurat and these kind of painters, because they were really fitting that
period of time
story
also.
and that period of time.
Okay. really. I'm interested in that move, just in terms of my own interest. That how to tell a story, the story on the page versus the story in film, and so it's so interesting with his work, because I mean the visual is obviously so important, and yet it doesn't just detract. It actually enhances the storytelling, it seems, and that seems like a tension to have such a potential tension to have such a just striking and unique style, but not to take away from the story, but to add to it. And so I guess so it's interesting to hear how he put those together, and how kind of one leads to the other, and they kind of feed off of each other. You've kind of jumped around in kind of my questions, so let me. I do kind of want to go back to his use of puppets and the mixture of puppets and live action, and I'm curious, because I know he certainly started off more with just puppets in his earlier, particularly some of his short works, like we'll be seeing in a little bit. But he also, and then he moved to kind of a mixture, and then he kind of moved back to puppets. So I guess, were there particular stories that he felt were better with live action, to have that mixture with live action actors? Were there stories he thought were better just with puppets? Did he have a preference did he prefer working? It's like, was it better to work with live actors or puppets? Did he have a preference for or animation?
Well, it was like, that's again, my grandfather. I really admire him now that I'm older. So when I was younger, of course, I just looked at the film and I loved the films. But now as I'm older and everything I've done in my life, I just really admire and am amazed at the efficiency, like I said, how efficient he was, and the discipline, like that he was really able, and the kind of the growth, and that goes to your question, that the puppet films he did, he kind of, each one was like, it was a film of its own. It was a great work on its own. But at the same time, it was for him like exploring and pushing the limits, trying new things. Like with the film we're gonna see, Inspiration, it was glass puppets. He decided, why don't we see if glass can move? And yet he didn't just do an experiment like, oh, let's see if glass can move. He built a beautiful story that was again fitting to be portrayed by these glass figurines. That was poetical, that was inspirational, and that's the name of the film, Inspiration. And then he sort of moved to the next film, again, didn't want to repeat himself, never repeated himself, but he was kind of pushing the limits, searching and exploring. And he did King Lavra, then he did Treasure Bird Island, and there he tried to combine sort of the cell animation, the many techniques, and to see what is it gonna look like. And he made the film like feature film length to see, and all those things were very innovative, and he had to push for that because the studio he worked in was not doing that.
Right.
So he had to always sort of fight and petition, this is what I want to do, and this is how I'm gonna do it. So he always wanted to go further, and I think he did sort of want to reach that live action possibility, but he took these steps, and then when that gave him also greater courage until he got to the Voyage to the Prehistoric Time, where he suddenly was courageous enough to believe or to have sufficient experience on the puppet film to know this is gonna work, or I know how to do it together to even have the live actor work. And again, that goes at the same time to the efficiency, where it was a different type of story, like my mother was telling me earlier, where it was a real story. Like it was a story that didn't need to be
and
told.
in a real environment also. And why he should use puppets. for
When
that.
you could
It's
use a
good
live
to
actor.
have live actor and combine with puppets with animals which doesn't exist. Therefore, it was first really experiment to
Right.
combine this kind of technique, and not everybody realized that it was made in 1950. You know,
Right.
there was no computer, nothing like that. He have to have camera which control everything. He also technically built everything. He makes sketches for people to build double exposure camera. We didn't have Oxbury camera like at Disney
Right.
that time already. You know, it was very. It's unbelievable for us when we go through all this, that in this time it was such a unique that somebody start to do really unique design and combination of this technique in film. I don't know anyone really who tried to do it except Méliès in the beginning. You know, that was really unbelievable that still today it's the best example for people who work with computer to combine the technique or
Absolutely.
clay design.
Well, we're running out of time, so I'll ask my last question. Just to kind of conclude, I could keep talking about this forever, but we've been asking authors when we've had these interviews to recommend books that influenced them. So I guess I thought we'd do a similar kind of concluding question, but instead stay in the realm of film. So I guess what 3 films would you recommend either by Karel Zeman or what 3 films maybe we could see his influence kind of outside, whether in Czech or the world cinema, to see how his work has influenced?
Well, we think that it's good to stay with the books.
Okay. Stay with the books then.
Because it's very, because really when we look at it and when we think about it, my grandfather loved books. He loved to read. He read so much, and I don't think, for example, Jules Verne, I don't think he could have, and I'm sure he would have said the same. He could not have done the films he's done without having those books and
Okay.
being able to read in those books.
As a literature scholar, I'm happy to go with books.
But it also goes, I think this is so important to emphasize, because I think even if you want to make a film or any kind of art, but film especially, you cannot possibly make a great film, a lasting film, without having the knowledge from the books, the literary background. And that's what I think is sad a little bit, that people don't read as much. And so if they, for example, study film, like if you go and study literature, then you kind of expect you're gonna have to read. But if you study film, you may not be so driven to be reading a fiction and stories and storytelling. You're gonna rather read about directors or editing, but that's not, I think, gonna give you. My grandfather had to learn everything, the technique and everything, pretty much himself and by experimentation. But what really gave him the ability to tell these stories so beautifully, and all the questions you asked about how did he combine, or why did he combine the illustrations, or why did he choose certain design, all that he had from the reading and the books that he's had. So books are important.
Do you have a recommendation for us? What should we read then? Jules Verne.
Jules Verne.
If you haven't read Jules Verne, we got to read
Yes.
some Jules Verne.
For sure, all this classical story,
Classics,
Odyssey,
Virgil, Aeneas, Odyssey, Iliad, all those sort of the pillars of literature, of Western civilization. I could recommend other civilizations, but I don't know that much about the others, so I don't want to.
So we'll start with those big Western epics at the
Yes,
beginning.
yes.
We'll start with the Iliad and
Yeah.
go forward from there.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
I want to just always I mention that our house, every wall was shelves with books. It was like
Yes,
library.
that's true, yeah.
Therefore, and my father always he said, "You don't need some film school. You should read all these books."
on that note, I think that's books. Keep reading books.
Yes.
yes.
And the films will come with that.
Yes,
So,
Right.
absolutely.
Yeah.
so, well, thank you again so much. I look forward to the rest of our afternoon together. So,
Thank you.
But